Greetings all. Welcome to Aquarian Diary. I'm your host, John Irving. It is March 3rd, 2024. Today I want to share something that I think is extremely important, and I hope you'll listen to this in its entirety. It has really significant implications, not just for us as individuals, but for all of us here on Earth. And not just in this lifetime, but in future lifetimes as well. Before I do that, though, I want to circle back to an episode I published on February 12th, which was titled Mars, Pluto, and Venus Conjunct in Aquarius, Trauma of the Divine Feminine. After I published that episode, I was, of course, curious to see how that might play out in the world, and for several days after, I was paying attention to the news. After some reflection and a lot of reporting on this topic, I think one of the main manifestations of that was the Alabama Supreme Court ruling on in vitro fertilization. That ruling was made public on February 16th, the very day that Venus and Pluto conjuncted in early Aquarius. The implications of this ruling could literally alter the outcome of the November United States presidential election, and it has very significant implications for women, of course. If an embryo is a person, and someone who is pregnant has a mishap, like an accident or something, that causes her to have a miscarriage, is that murder? Also, abortion could be murder. If an embryo is a human being, are women going to have to be locked up for 9 months so that they won't commit murder by accident? The implications are just stunning. Our actual birthdays might be 9 months earlier than we think. Does the voting age need to be reduced by 9 months? I mean, you can go on and on and on. So this represents an attack on women at a very fundamental level, which would criminalize Mars and Pluto, many aspects of what to date has been fairly normal or accepted behavior. And although many Republicans have been stating that they support IVF, the question of whether an embryo is a human being or not, from their perspective, has still not been clearly defined or articulated. The upside to this is that this is the kind of thing that could trigger women to get out and vote in very significant numbers in November, because this affects them very personally. Anyway, given the stunning ramifications of that, and how closely it reflects the narrative of this triple conjunction, as well as the timing of it, which is amazingly precise, I think that's the major development. There were others, of course, too, but that one really jumps out. What do you think? Is that it? Or are there other events you would point to? How did this show up for you? Let us know in the comments, which I always look forward to. Now on to the main topic. There's a lot I want to express here. It's going to be challenging for me to convey all my thoughts because this is not scripted. And I have so many thoughts on this topic, I just hope I can manage. I hope I can do a decent job. Recently, someone that I have known for over 20 years passed away. It was sudden and unexpected. This occurred this past week, but I only found out about it on Friday because they lived in another part of the country. And it's someone I stayed in touch with. This person was a bit older than me. They weren't young. And that's all good. I've communicated with a lot of mutual friends and connected with some people to inform them, and it's all under control. Don't worry about commenting on that. The important part of it, though, is that I looked at this person's transits, and sure enough, at exactly the time of his passing, there was a very notable transit that was exact that I would associate with this event. And not only that, but this transit is linked to another challenging aspect from Saturn 7.5 years ago. The transit in question was a conjunction. The transit 7.5 years ago was a square, of course. I was there and involved with some very dramatic and life-changing events, a major crisis that occurred in this person's life 7.5 years ago during the square. This person had really been there for me when I went through a very challenging period, and in many ways was very generous and kind to me. So when he had major things hitting the fan, I was there for him. I was the last person to help him deal with a very challenging situation. Where am I going with all this? In my perspective, this person never fully recovered from those very traumatic and life-altering events that occurred 7.5 years ago, which ultimately led to his passing 7.5 years later, or last week. It's very, very clear. And just so you don't freak out, there wasn't just one aspect in play this past week. It was a combination of transits and aspects that combined resulted in his passing. Now, I could say, in fact, that this outcome was fated. It was his time to go. He had lived out his karma, and I'm getting strong chills saying that right now. So I guess that's true. I was speculating, but now I'm getting reinforcement. The point of all this is that really traumatic events can play out for years and take a very heavy toll on us. Anybody who has suffered serious trauma, or the passing of a loved one, or some crisis, or some really challenging event in their life, will understand this. It's just common sense. But trauma plays out for us collectively as well. Right now, there are horrific events occurring in Ukraine and in the Middle East, just really disturbing. Unimaginable levels of suffering and trauma are being inflicted on millions of people. And those are just two of the things that are going on right now. There are people experiencing extreme poverty or the effects of drug addiction or whatever it is in our societies around the world. Now, I know as an astrologer that trauma doesn't just affect us in this lifetime. This is one of the biggest misunderstandings or misconceptions or just plain ignorance that affects humanity as a whole. For the most part, we are completely clueless about how trauma plays out for multiple lifetimes. I see this all the time in people's astrology charts. The indicators are right there, often. And when I do readings for people, I will generally talk about that and give people some practical suggestions on how to work with that so that they don't perpetuate it. Because what happens is, if you had something really traumatic happen 3 lifetimes ago, it's still imprinted in you energetically. You have a natural kind of fear response or a vulnerability to that kind of experience. And often that will show up in our current incarnation. And if we don't work through that and heal it, it'll show up in future incarnations as well. So healing our trauma is incredibly important, like monumentally important. Again, this is in the vein of doing our shadow work, which I have long argued here is a critical part of our spiritual path and evolution, to take that upon ourselves consciously, to deliberately work with it, heal it, and transform it. And again, I'm getting very strong energy right now. This has to be a part of our spiritual practice for those of us who are more aware or advanced, because we do not want to keep perpetuating these cycles. Usually the people that are closest to us, that's like your family and your siblings, your relatives, people that you get married to or have intense relationships with or intense encounters with. These are the people that you have the most amount of karma with, and you came back together to resolve that. Traumatic events or formative events that affect you deeply on an emotional level, especially in your childhood, are often described by your placement of Chiron. Most people kind of avoid this because they're seeking bliss and happiness. They don't want to delve into the murkier, darker aspects of themselves. But ask anybody who works as a healer in the spiritual community, and they will understand exactly what I'm talking about. They work with this on all kinds of different levels. It can be physical, it can be in your chakras, it can be energetic, it can be working with angels, whatever, right? But you have to be consciously involved in this, or it will just manifest and play out as it normally does. Events will seemingly occur to you because karma needs to be resolved. But on another level, as societies, when we engage in things like warfare or forcing people into poverty or not taking care of the homeless or those with mental health issues, we're perpetuating this for the whole society, for the whole planet. It will go on and on and on. Warfare is just horrific in this regard. What's happening now in Ukraine and in the Middle East is going to ripple through many generations to come. That is what people need to understand. Now, a lot of people, I'm sure, will think this is just very woo-woo and really out there, but many of my listeners will know what I'm talking about. Society as a whole, though, like I said, is completely clueless about this. So there's two things we need to do. One is we just need to stop perpetuating violence and inflicting trauma on people. That is how we perpetuate the darkness. And it goes on and on and on for many generations to come. The second thing we need to do is consciously work with people's traumas to heal and clear them. We do not necessarily need to experience them through traumatic events. There's all kinds of ways of working with that to clear and release those energies. And a lot of it has to do with forgiveness as being a core component of this. But what I'm getting at is that humanity will be locked into this never-ending cycle of trauma unless we break the cycle and heal and clear those patterns from our lineages across the world. Now, there's also trauma that's being inflicted on the natural environment. That's a whole other layer or dimension of this. And I have argued here about how we can heal that as well. We can call upon divine grace, but we have to do so consciously, and we have to do it from our heart with pure intentions. This is not just an intellectual exercise. It has to be heart-centered, period. Now, what I'm saying may be centuries ahead of its time, but I can assure you that in the future, humanity is going to be tackling this very consciously. And we will elevate the level of consciousness and energy here on Earth to a much, much higher level than it is currently. But to do so, we have to resolve all the darkness, which includes all these insane traumas that occur to people during their incarnations. And many of the people I have read for have had past life memories or experiences that have been insanely brutal. Older souls are generally much more empathic and compassionate because they have experienced a lot of suffering, so they can relate to other people's suffering from a more compassionate perspective. This is why many of us, like the people who are listening to me right now, get so freaked out by what's happening in the world, because we can empathize with it, and we do not want other people to experience these kinds of things, for reasons that go way beyond just rational ones. It has to stop, and there are very dark figures who are deliberately inflicting mass trauma on large populations of people, because it will keep us trapped in lower dimensions of consciousness for generations to come. That's why this is so important. It has not escaped my attention that I am discussing this while Saturn, the Sun, Mercury, and Neptune are transiting Pisces. I have a natural house system, so Pisces is in my 12th, and the 12th can represent things like endings and death. Don't take that too literally. And we had the conjunction of Mercury and the Sun on Saturn recently, which I talked about on my community tab, and many people have been expressing that the energies have been very heavy lately. That's not surprising. The sun will move into Aries on March 19th or 20th, depending on where you live. That is the spring equinox and a beginning of a new annual cycle. The energy should pick up quite a bit in terms of our physical vitality and activity levels. Anyway, I think we need to raise our consciousness about this horrific cycle of trauma and violence and harm that is being caused when our societies allow mass suffering to occur, and usually to our most vulnerable people. We are being incredibly short-sighted and idiotic. It's not just a simple, straightforward ethical or moral question about the here and now. It's the implications that, like I said, may ripple through many generations, if not centuries. I know my healer friends out there are going to know exactly what I'm talking about. Yes, right? You do. You get this. They work tirelessly and very hard. And I know many people who do that at trying to help people clear these kinds of energies. And they're often just eking out a living doing it. So they really deserve recognition and support for the work that they do. So when you do your shadow work and your healing, and you forgive those who have trespassed against you, you are not only helping yourself, you are helping your lineage, your future incarnations, the incarnations of your loved ones, society, and the whole world. That is the message. For more detail, check the episode description for other episodes or articles that are related or that I mentioned. And if you're interested in a reading with me, I'll put a link to that as well. I have a 10% off special on currently. Many sincere thanks to everyone who supports me, especially my YouTube members. Thank you very much. Take care, all the best, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye for now.